Hello, my friends. In 1982, a group of young would-be lawyers and graduates and soon-to-be graduates from a number of Ivy colleges with law schools in them, being Harvard, Yale, and quite a few others that I can't list off the top of my head, got together and they formed this organization called the Federalist Society. And you would think, by the way some people talk and the way some of the rhetoric comes out about the Federalist Society, that this is something that has existed since the beginning of the country or since the various earliest decades of the country. Isn't true. So this is a fairly recent thing. And so in 92, so in 82, so I would have been 14-ish. Yeah, I think 13, 14, 15. Anyway, so the idea being is that these folks got together and to push an agenda. And currently, the Federalist Society includes over 70,000. That's 70,000 70,000 lawyers across the country and across the world, and are members and or active members of the Federalist Society and or working for them directly or indirectly. And you don't hear that talk about that too much, but it's interesting how you what can come up on a casual Google search. And I mean casual, so you usually get better results than if you're doing appointed research, because if people want to give you false information on the internet, that's truth. Anything and everything has got to be suspect. Anything and everything anybody says, myself, anybody says on this internet, take it with a grain of salt. This is where that critical thinking shit comes in to how I understand what critical meaning is. And you know what? I'm going to have to do a damn video on that freaking thing. So in this case, they have the Federal Society was founded in 1982. And made up of numerous lawyers from various Ivy League law schools. They currently have chapters in over 200 law schools. So they have an influence in every major institution of higher learning in this country. Right here in Iowa, in Des Moines, Drake Law School, for example, has a Federalist Society chapter and a office nearby. And I know it because I've seen it. No, it is what it is. They argue that the Constitution should be interpreted as it is and should not be based upon situations. So the information that the Constitution is established as it was written in 1774 or whenever the hell it was they actually sat down and started writing on the damn thing. As it was written, and as it was ratified, and I think it was ratified in 78 or 79, was after the country was officially a country that we ratified it. It was one of the first acts of Congress, if I'm remembering my history right, and I could be completely wrong on this. Feel free to correct me in the comments. God knows I don't get any comments at all on this channel, and I've had one new subscriber in 5-6 years. Man, I'm grateful for you for logging in there, Di. I'm serious. Anyhow, so they argue that the beliefs of the Constitution is as is. So as it's written, it's perfect, and that we should not try to interpret things to equate modern sensibilities, modern situations. So, being as an example, the Second Amendment was not part of the original Constitution, hence an amendment that was added after the fact, and that it was to promote a well-regulated militia. And it's very vague because there was no real intent or need for it to be elaborate at the time. At the time, most grown-ass men in post-revolutionary America packed a gun. Now, you might have had a tiny little, pea shooter in your pocket, or you might have had a big old blunderbuss hanging on the wall by the door. The further out you get into the sticks, the more likely that was to happen. In many cases, the idea of a well-regulated militia, well, okay, let's just look at that from a slightly different segue. the idea being was at the time there was no the initial government setup. There was no provisions really for a navy and an army. We established them in there, but they would, the government's responsible for creating and maintaining and funding such forces. But it was not really established until after the country was established, of course. And the lion's share of our militaries were based on a similar profile used by Europe at the time. And so the idea of a standing army, well, not increasingly, it was becoming less rare. It was more common for countries to have standing militaries, but they were still pretty heavily dependent on levies. So in the vernacular, we would understand militia. So basically, they put out a call to the country throughout the country saying, look, every able-bodied individual that can hold a gun needs to be on the front line now. And in many ways, that's exactly how it functioned, all the way up until the Civil War, until after the Civil War. So, I mean, if you look at the Civil War, for example, many companies, many, quote, companies of troops, usually regimental sizes, and then the average regiment in the Northern Union or Union regiment would be around 1,000 troops of soldiers. We're talking an infantry regiment, around 1,000 troops, then broken up into smaller commands, and then attached to a brigade or a mini semi brigade or the corps of the army or whatever, however they needed to do at the time. So, but the individual regiments, often as not, were volunteer regiments raised from people not conscripted per se at the very beginning, but who volunteered to enter, and they become ready-made soldiers almost out the get-go. It's not like they took them off to boot camp for 6 months or 3 or 4 months to get them prepped. No, these were people that they came to the field, in many cases bringing their own firearm, especially in the South. A lot of the original troops that fought in the very first skirmishes of the Civil War were armed with their own weapons that they brought from home. And this is where they get that concept of the well-regulated mission, because it was at no point in our ancestors' mind could they possibly have envisioned the level of firepower that's available in the modern era. They can't possibly have envisioned that much death and destruction at the whims of anybody with an itchy finger. So, of course, the Second Amendment doesn't address a whole bunch of problems. Well, the Federalist Society would have you retain and only focus on what exists in the wording. That's it. There should not be amendments or adjustments or changes or interpretations thereof that expand on that. If we're going to do that, we should have an entire brand new amendment that amends the Second Amendment kind of thing. And even then they would fight it. So this is their agenda. And they turned this into this coalition for a political agenda for conservatism. And they're behind the scenes. They're pulling strings behind the scenes on some pretty nefarious crap. And one of those nefarious things that came to light is the domino. I love the dominoes. You got to keep in the dominoes effect. Well, let me check my list here because I think I might be slipping. So, argues the Constitution as is 5 out of 9. Yeah, we're getting here. Okay, so all through the last couple of years of Obama's office, Mitch McConnell was pushing hard to get a certain group of Supreme Court justices and court justices around the country that the Senate appoints to their positions replaced, with the intentions thereof of them following this uber conservative mindset, opening the door for a lot of things that would reverse a lot of amendments and judgment calls to the earliest constitutional laws, including Roe versus Wade. It's just, think about that for a minute. That these people took the long view. It's going to take us time, perhaps decades, to get into position, to get our puppets into position to do our bidding. and we're going to work hard at this. And it's a collaborative effort from a bunch of people that are not elected officials. Keep that in mind, because the things like the Koch brothers organization, the exact same kind of bullshit as the Federalist Society. So when Trump becomes president, he's handed a list. Somebody's already conveniently pre-made a list of suitable candidates for upcoming important judiciary roles. You know, you have to wait for a Supreme Court justice to die, but so those are rare and far and few in between. So when you get an opportunity to change out 2 or 3 of them in your career, like Mitch did, you got to work on it really hard to make sure it goes your way. And so you promote these fellows and you embolden these fellows, and you end up with fellows like this individual, who is in the pockets of the Federalist Society. Oh, he'll tell you he's not. Oh, he doesn't take any graft. He doesn't take any kickbacks. He doesn't take any, nobody's giving him free vacations on yachts that are way out of his his price range. You know, how is it that this wonderfully vaunted Supreme Court justice, who's a very important member of keeping the checks and balances in America functioning, in the hands of a damn uber rich? Oh, he's got a really rich buddy. There's nothing wrong having a really rich buddy, and you're not wrong. In a normal situation, if Justice Thomas was the landscaper or working at the Firestone plant across the street from where I live, the Bridgestone Firestone, or I don't know, anything other than being the public official that he is, I would just say he was damn fortunate to have a really, really generous, wealthy friend. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's when you start putting them together that they start smelling funny. They start looking funny. And then you start looking at, well, there's perks and there's perks. And I'll be the first one that says that the difference between a career, a job and work or a career and work is perks in a lot of aspects. We do things because we like to do them. It's rare that we find a job we love to do and that we look forward to going to every day. It's rare for most people. And it's impossible for the majority of the poor folk in this country. We got to take what we can get, and we're supposed to be utterly grateful for it because these ass clowns say we're supposed to be. So anyway, so you get this group like the Federalist Society, and they push agendas which are extremely conservative agendas that are based on some very draconian concepts of the Constitution, and they're backed by just about the lion's share of I don't know how many lawyers there are in the United States total. I don't want to just to go Google it. I'd have to fiddle with diminishing this damn thing, and I don't want to do it. So hundreds of thousands of lawyers in this country, and how many of them are members or employed by the Federalist Society? Have you ever noticed just how many? Why is that important? Well, let's start with the obvious. Who writes the laws? The politicians. Who interprets the laws? The politicians and the judges. How do you get to be a politician and a judge? Most politicians and judges, not all, but a large percentage of them, started out as lawyers. Just look. It seems like every fifth politician was some kind of lawyer at some point, or went to school to be a lawyer, and then went into something other than lawyering. But they still are, a lawyer. They still have a university education. In most cases, a high level one from an Ivy League school. Not all of them. I mean, Drake University here in Des Moines is a renowned school for both lawyers and pharmacists, apparently, but it's not something you hear them trumping on the world stage very often, right? So anyway, the point I'm getting at though is it's convenient that you have this organization who's really well-meaning division to make sure that we kowtow to the original intent of the Constitution. Well, nowhere so this is when we get arguments like Roe versus Wade. Nowhere in the Constitution did it say anything about sexual rights, let alone abortion. Well, abortion was you'd have to be Trump stupid to not understand that abortion, as long as humanity has been has been a civilization, even longer before that, abortions existed. You know, I mean, there's historical references going back throughout history of abortions that have occurred, and depending on the era and the location, some of them are quite elaborate. Compare, you know, when right on par with the modern surgery today, and people survived the surgery. People had it, and they lived through it, and that's that. Then there's so to say this is not something that's a human right. Well, they would argue that that's an argument for something else, but the Constitution doesn't say that. And the Constitution doesn't say that you have a right to have a 30-round clip in your AR-15, let alone you have a right to have a semi-automatic weapon in your possession, let alone you have the right in many states to carry those weapons concealed, because that's your right. No offense, doesn't say any of that in the Constitution either. Now, it's been a long time since I read the entire damn Constitution, but I'm pretty damn sure that it doesn't say that anywhere in the Constitution. Pretty confident it doesn't say that in any of the amendments to the Constitution, although, once again, I'm not a professional in that or an amateur enthusiast in that avenue, so I can't be 100% sure. So my point, I guess, is when I hear these references to, so Trump comes into office, he's given a list of potential candidates for these high judicial systems created by a group of damn lawyers with political aspirations that intend to make sure a certain narrative remains constant in this country. In and of itself, that's not a bad thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing. What they're trying to achieve is not necessarily a bad thing. It's when other people hijack their ideas or run with it to the extreme outcomes. Because a lot of times you can see something and somebody, well, we're going to do this. And then you start looking at, like you play a game of chess, you start playing out in your mind in advance your moves as far advanced as you can, and try to play out your opponent's possible moves so you can find counters for them. Although I've had a chess master once tell me, he says that's all a load of crap. He says he should just understand how everything moves on the board, and just be aware of your opponent. And 30 years later, I'm still working all that shit out. So, take with that with what you will. Anyway, so the point, though, is I guess in my mind, is I hear these groups, and it's now obvious that these are political entities with a lot of resources, a lot of power behind them. In this case, a shitload of judicial power, legal power behind them, to affect major change in the country, and whether it's good or bad is yet to be determined, because once again, one group of people's views on how things should be doesn't necessarily mean their view is a good view. There's reason change is inevitable and important, because without change things get a stagnating problem. It is what it is. Anyhow, I babbled enough about this crap. And little Missy over here, she's more than ready to get out of her box. So till next weekend, until I can figure out some other crap to cry about. Wherever the hell the damn, let's go down the hole, right? Till next time.